This
Fordham.
conference will now be recorded.
Nathan, and then there's another one that's not identified, caller number 3, that is audio. I wonder if that's tied into any of you other guys or no.
I don't think it's me.
Okay. Nathan, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay. You know what? It looks like, because I'm looking at these things, the little green thing under caller number 3 popped up for you. So, let's do this. I've got an interesting situation that absent something else, I thought I would share with you guys. But anything you all want to jump in with?
Just at some point, depending if we have any time today, I've been doing I went through a training, have been doing a grief recovery group, and just, possibly talking with you about some of the things that I've been seeing as a result of working on grief with the gamblers, because it's almost exclusively been a gamblers group up until now.
Beautiful. This is a matter of principle. I love that, and and we've talked about this. The part of the part of gambling that I believe is can be understood as a morbid grief reaction, and this whole that chasing is in strict gambling terms is you're placing a bet to try and win back money that you lost, or to shift that a little bit to try and undo, literally at a financial level, literally undo the problem of loss. And so that's the pragmatic reality of what chasing is in dollars and cents. But I think it's not too far a leap to understand that as a metaphor, that gambling is a way of trying to deal with loss, or mitigate the problems of loss, or gain mastery over the problem of loss. And so I think it's a central issue. So yeah, let's we definitely want to spend some time with that, and that ties in with what I've got to share with you. What about you, Nathan? What's going on? Anything going on with you? Any questions, thoughts?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. How many gamblers are you working with right now?
I've got 1 gambler and 2 partners.
Okay. All right. What's the when you're working with the partners, what's your experience of that? Because that's a different energy.
It's interesting. 2 very different experiences with each of them. The one has really come in, and from the get-go has understood that she's here to work on herself and how she responds to this issue and what she's doing within this relationship, but that it is her that is working on her. And the other one, he's really has a hard time stepping away from the idea of this is a problem and we've got to fix it.
Okay. So one of the spouses is the wife, and the other and the other one is the husband?
Correct.
Okay. And just to you guys may have realized it's really strikingly different in a lot of cases, whether the spouse is male or female. There's a big difference there.
Mm.
And so that may be part of what you're running into.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. So it looks like Gene just logged in. All right, so let me share with you something that's pretty interesting, and I think will throw a lot of things into the mix that we can chew on. So, I've told you, and I think you all know, that one of the things that I end up doing fairly often is being called in as an expert witness in legal cases, and it's a whole different energy. So this is and a lot of them have been, because I was in Chicago for 28 years, a lot of them are out of the Chicago area. But it's something that I do that I kind of have a love-hate relationship. One of the things that I love doing is the detective work around it, and the gathering of information and figuring things out and making connections. And I enjoy testifying in court. What I just really hate doing, though, or really hate's too strong a word. What I really struggle with and don't like doing is the grind of drafting a report. So, and those of you, I mean, if you haven't been involved in one of these cases, then there will be a time where you may be invited to. So, I find that all of the legal cases that I'm involved with are very instructive. I mean, part of it because we know that over 50% of gamblers cross the line into illegal activity. So it's simply it's part of the disease. And you all may or may not address that in clinical situations. You may or may not even ask. And a lot of times people cross the line into illegal activity, and there's no consequences for that, at least in the legal arena. And I couldn't tell you what percentage of illegal activity ends up getting, prosecuted, but I'm sure it's a very small percentage. Anyway, the cases are always interesting. And here are the themes that I look for, and the flow of it is number one, is there a diagnosis of gambling addiction? And that's really easy to do. And all I do is and I'll tell you my process with this is I'll send somebody the South Oaks copy of the SOGS, even though I don't really need that anymore to make a diagnosis, but for the purpose of a legal report, it's nice to have it's good to have the assessment tools and the diagnostic criteria laid out, and to point out for the court, here's how they answered these, and here's the scoring, and here's the meaning of that. So I'll use the South Oaks gambling screen, which is really just yes or no and fill in the blank. And then one of the most useful tools is the Gamblers Anonymous 20 questions, which are asked in yes and no format. But what I do is have people write out paragraph. I want a paragraph response to each one of those questions. And the way people respond to those questions in a paragraph form is very diagnostic in and of itself, not only for what they say, but for what they don't say. And so as I'm reading their responses, what I do is I go through and identify what are some of the holes in their stories, and there always is, and where do I need to help build a bridge? Because here's the flow with the court. I want to diagnose, is there a gambling addiction, yes or no? And the answer to that's pretty easy, and that's more kind of boilerplate. Then the second question is what, if any, connection is there between their gambling addiction and their illegal activity? And that's really the critical piece of it. And then the third, that's a corollary of that, is if there's a connection, what is it? So to that point, what we do is roll over then into Henry Lesier's work out of his book, The Chase. You guys have heard me mention Henry, but his last name is Lesiur. So The Chase is one of those foundation books in the field. I think you can probably still get it somewhere. It's out of print, but it should be still available. But in that book, he describes something called the spiral of options and involvement. And it goes simply like this, is that what he observed early on as a sociologist, and then he had a PhD in sociology, and then was chair of the Department of Criminal Justice Science at Illinois State University, and then he went back and got a PhD in psychology and actually moved over to the treatment side of gamblers before retiring. Henry also was the first editor of the Journal of Gambling Studies, and one of the brilliant people, the creator of the South Oaks gambling screen, one of the brilliant people in the field. I feel really blessed to have had a long relationship with Henry. where he and I got to work together for a number of years. But the spiral of option involvements is simply this: it tracks the flow of money, and basically, in the midst of a gambling addiction, we go through our own money, then we go through borrowed money, and then after those sources are dried up, and then selling possessions, and then after all that dries up, then we cross the line into illegal activity. Now, that's not a strictly linear process, because obviously if somebody's working, they may also be stealing money at the same time while they have money coming in from a job. And then if there's another source, they can borrow money. So again, but in most cases, you can track the progression, and the significance of that and the importance of clarifying that within a legal system is to be able to say, look, this person has a value system that is intact. If in fact they have a value system that's intact, and in the progression of the addiction, they crossed the line into illegal activity. Now, just a sidebar, the beauty now of having disordered gambling in the same diagnostic category in DSM-5 as substance use disorders is that the courts have a long history of understanding the connection between substance abuse, between substance addiction and crime, so much so that they have, in the federal system, they have diversion programs specifically to address that. So now with DSM-5, we're able to say to the court that if you understand substance abuse and its connection to criminal activity, and cases are adjudicated with that understanding, and that there are deferral programs, then plug gambling in at the same level. So that's been a real benefit for attorneys advocating for their clients. So the importance of the spiral of options is this: what I want to know is this person a gambler who crossed the line into illegal activity as a result of the progression of their addiction, or is this person just simply a thief who may also have a gambling problem? And I think the implications of that differentiation can be significant. Sometimes it's very clear cut, sometimes it gets a little muddy. Now, the other thing we want to look for in the flow of money is, what is the money used for? In a case that I had, I can't remember what I talked to you guys about, but there was just the sentencing just took place. This guy robbed 9 banks in the Chicago area, and his pattern was he would go on Friday, he would lose his paycheck at the casino, then he would go and rob the bank and get maybe $1,000, $800, $1,200, whatever it was, and take it home to his wife so that she would believe that, number one, he was not gambling, and that he was bringing his paycheck home. Or at times he would take the money and go right back to the casino. So in that sense, even though the stolen money didn't go directly to the casino, it actually was there, if not first order, then at least second order. So we always track the flow of money. And so the goal of my work in the legal system is to help the court understand, and usually the defense attorneys understand, the nature of gambling addiction and the relevance of that to the person's illegal behavior, for the purpose of downward departure from the sentencing guidelines, which means that they end up getting sentenced to less time than the statutory guidelines require. All right, so hopefully that's a good overview. So what I want to share with you guys, let me pause and see if anybody's got any questions so far. What I've said.
No questions here, sir.
All right. So here's what I want to share with you is I'm on the front end of a new case, and I'll leave out some of the details, but part of all this is a matter of public record if somebody was to know the the name and the situation. You can look it up because legal cases are all public, but I'm not going, don't need to give you that information. It's really kind of irrelevant. So, sorry, I'm kind of under the weather with my allergies, so I'm blowing my nose some in the middle of this. So, let me work my way through this. So this is I was contacted by the Federal Defender's Office in a federal jurisdiction. Obviously, that's where the Federal Defender's Office are, which means that the individual is broke and they cannot afford their own attorney. And so the federal government, through the Federal Defender's Office, assigns a lawyer to represent them. And fortunately, this lawyer is one that I've worked on several gambling cases, which is really good because they have a familiarity. I got to tell you that there are times where I've worked on cases where the lawyer had no clue what they were doing in terms of understanding gambling and how to present that to the court. And the good ones will listen and let me and allow me to educate them so that they can use that to advocate for their clients. The bad ones just kind of have their own idea about things and are not really interested in listening. But in this case, we've got a really good attorney. So I want to share some things with you that really are and then to share with you kind of my thought process as I go through this. Now, let me add a piece in. Those of you who've been with me for a while, we spent a lot of time talking about the dream world of the gambler, but we also talk about the dream world of the therapist treating the gambler. And just a reminder, what I simply mean by that is while we're collecting information, we're forming an impression, which we're supposed to do. Or we're forming diagnostic impressions, or as you're telling me your story, I'm creating an image in my mind about your life. Now, that's not a problem unless I confuse the image that I'm creating about you, unless I confuse that with your story. If I confuse my story about you with your story about you, then I'm in trouble. So what I'm saying is any impressions that I form, I have to recognize that they're just my impressions, and I need to check it out with you if what I'm imagining is true, what I'm thinking is true, is actually true. All right, so when I go through one of these, and by the way, this is an individual that I've talked to once for about 10 minutes so far. So we're on the front end of this, and what I'm sharing with you is information out of the PSR, which is the pre-sentence investigation report, which is done on every case. And it's done by the pre-sentence investigation department. And in all cases, I like having these because, they provide the court with their own assessment, their own overview. And so as I'm going through this, let me lay a foundation here that's very interesting. So in the pre-sentence report, they always list prior, legal problems. And this is a woman who I think is 42 or 43 years old. And at age 19 in the Midwest, there was a weapons issue when she was age 19. And even though she didn't have a permit to carry a firearm, she told the officers, and this was pulled from the records, that the gun was bought by her and her husband after they were involved in a domestic disturbance. Now that's interesting. That's something that I want to clarify. What did they both buy? Did they both buy the gun so that one could shoot the other, or was there somebody else involved? I don't know. But again, I'm looking at that and I'm thinking age 19. All right. She was not. She was sentenced. She pled guilty, deferred judgment, 180 days, unsupervised probation. Then the second one at age 21, third-degree theft, where she pawned a gold. She pawned some jewelry with a value estimated $1,200 to $1,500, a musical instrument, and some silverware, while her mother-in-law was hospitalized. Again, a suspended sentence and a $500 fine, discharge from probation. So those are the illegal activities. So now When you listen to that, you think, okay, is this person antisocial? Are they a thief? Or is this situational, and what's the life situation that these evolve out of? So this is just the front end of information that I'm receiving and things that I begin to wonder about. So here's a woman who has no relationship with her biological father, who was out of the picture when she was 4 or 5 months old, but they have not talked in years. So when I hear something like that, then kind of, John, going back to what you were talking about, I'm thinking, okay, here's a primary loss. So I'm just going to put an asterisk behind that piece of information. Then her mother marries another guy who is physically abusive of the mother. Here's something that really struck me. And it says she had a brother, a stepbrother, born out of that another relationship with her mother and a stepfather. There was a brother born who died when he was 15 months old from a reaction to an egg allergy. Right, and here's the striking part about this. And this is I'm lifting this from the pre-sentence investigation. The defendant, who was 5 years old at the time, so here's my client is a 5-year-old little girl, stated his death was, and this is a direct quote, "The only time mom ever hit me because I told her it was mine," the egg that the 15-month-old ate that died from. That the egg was mine, but I wasn't going to let my sister get into trouble. She just recently finally forgave me for that, close quote. All right, so here we have and these are one of those things that is flashing neon signs for everybody, especially gamblers. So here's a primary trauma at 5 years old, for which she assumed, as a 5-year-old girl, she assumes responsibility for, even though it was her, and I don't know whether the little sister was younger, could have been a younger sister, I don't know yet. But I'm looking at that, and I will tell you that that's something that we're going to bounce around in, because what I know is, in life, and this is one of the reasons, John, as you know, it's so important to have people make a list of all the losses in our life, both real and imagined, but also what is it that's happened that you blame yourself for. So there's an open question as to whether this, at 5-year-old, in some ways, she might have blamed herself for. So if she blamed herself for, even secondarily, for her 15-month-old brother's death, then there's punishment involved. And so oftentimes what we find in the history of pathological gamblers, the part of gambling that is a repetition compulsion to either try and fix something that was broken, to undo the problem of loss, there's also a part of that that can be masochistic, in the sense of wanting to keep losing in order to keep punishing ourselves. In fact, if you go look at the literature in the combo book, there is the statement there that I can't remember what page it's on. I don't see my copy of it right here. Then too, there is the theory that compulsive gamblers want to punish themselves. There is much evidence to support that theory. Well, that comes from Edmund Berger's work, more of a psychodynamic or psychoanalytic perspective. And I dismiss that in a lot of cases. I think it's more about trying to gain mastery over loss, but there is an element of that. So again, in this happens to be a forensic case, but in the treatment process, one of the things we want to be listening and looking for is, what is it, if there is in this person's history that they have done, that they carry guilt for which the question then is, how then, if they have not forgiven themselves, how are they punishing themselves for? This is a huge piece, a significant principle, and one of those things that we kind of want to keep front of mind awareness. Not that we're going to manufacture something and apply it where it doesn't apply, but I will tell you in my experience that it is it's a huge it's a real commonality in many of the gamblers that I work with, especially the female gamblers that I work with. All right. So moving on. So now I don't even have to talk to this person to know or to begin to hypothesize some connections between a trauma history and her gambling and then the illegal activity. And again, it's not my job to manufacture something that's not there. It's my job to identify what connections are there and then find a way of presenting that to the court in a way that makes sense. And by the way, this is stuff that this client, are connections that she at this point doesn't even make in her life. Moving on, then there's another stepfather, a subsequent stepfather, when she was a teenager, who would, quote, discipline her using corporal punishment. Those are quotes. She punched and hit her using whatever was, open quote, handy, close quote. She stated the physical abuse primarily came from his fists, belts, or a paddle, and that she hated the stepfather during her childhood, and that he, open quote, practiced a military style discipline, close quote, and would punish her for if she made a C in school. And then she adds kind of parenthetically that, open quote, some of it was my fault, period, close quote. All right, so here's here's an adolescent, a little girl in elementary school, taking on a degree of responsibility for a stepfather's physical abuse of her. And I would argue that there's something that is that's not right about that. So again, to the degree that she owns some responsibility, there's guilt that goes with that, and then there's the sense that whatever punishment is there is justified. All right, so we're collecting. Now we got a birth father that's disappeared pretty soon after birth, a history of abuse, the death of a sibling. So it's looking kind of difficult so far. At age 12, she runs away from the home because of her stepfather's abuse. At age 12. And at that time, a man found her hiding under a vehicle and took her home with him. She stated she took on the role of an adult while residing with him. She added that she was his, open quote, girlfriend, close quote, and provided, open quote, whatever he needed, period, close quote. The man, who was 35 years old, so now clearly at a minimum we've got statutory rape, of which she is the victim. So a 35-year-old man with a 12-year-old girl brought people over to his house to, open quote, do sexual things, close quote, with her. She explained that she believed this lifestyle was normal, and that is, open quote, how the world worked, period, close quote. So she was with him for 2 years until she finally left. All right, so now what I'm pretty clear about is that what I'll be including in my report is a history of her trauma and the impact of that on brain development, and the impact of that and how that impairs the development of our higher reasoning. And I don't know, you guys have done enough work on trauma, but what we'll do is insert a section on trauma and the impairment of her ability to make decisions that are in her own best interest, but also an element of repetition compulsion where trauma is simply the norm for her. And so from a forensic perspective, and this sounds kind of strange, but I'm grateful in one sense that we have the history we have, because it makes it easier to present to the court a compelling case that this person's gambling addiction is a byproduct and is connected to her history of trauma and abuse, and a way of trying solving and mitigating that. So let's keep going. Interestingly enough, after she left this guy, she was down in Texas selling magazines, ended up in the hospital. Her mother and whatever stepfather was involved at that time brought her back to where she lived and put her in a group home. So now we got more abandonment. And this new stepfather also physically abused her. And then she went to live, she found her biological father, her birth father, went to live with him briefly. He physically abused her, and she stated that her father, quote, did everything he could to tell her she wasn't his daughter, and went out of his way to make her feel she was not a part of the family. So here's a secondary abandonment. This is kind of like a bad, reads like a bad novel, but it's part of the what is. Her oldest son, she has a son that's born when she's 18 years old, does not know who the father is, because she was working in a bar at the time and sleeping with a lot of different people. And then she had another son when she was age 19 that she gave up for adoption. And she stated that aside from a few pictures when he was a child, she has had no contact with him. So again, that's one of those pieces that is a flashing neon light that as I talk with her, I'll invite her to talk with me about that. Then she has another son who is currently 15 years old, who is autistic, that she is the primary caregiver for. And her biggest concern is, if she's incarcerated, who's going to take care of this son? Now here's what's interesting. Another thing that's interesting, she stated in it, and it's in the report, says the defendant noted that her involvement in the instant offense, which is the legal language, that, open quote, my biggest regret of all of this, because I didn't put him first, her son. I didn't think about it. I didn't think of the consequences. It's selfish. I don't care what happens to me, end quote. That makes complete sense to me. It says also that she's not a sociopath, that she's got a value system, that she loves her son, that there's something intact, that she's violated her value system. These are all assumptions that I'm making simply based on what I know so far. But what was interesting, when I talked to her, she kept saying, she said, I'm really scared about what they wrote in the report, this report that I'm reading. I said, well, what part is that? She said, well, the part that says I didn't care. I don't care what happens to me. She said, that makes me sound like a complete idiot, somebody who's no good. And I told her, I said, what, let's talk about that, and I'll help you explain to the court what you meant by that. So it was interesting to me that's one of the things that she was really concerned about, is how the court might view her, because she said, I don't care what happens to me. Says her mother is disappointed in her involvement in the instant offense. And here's the final thing. She's court ordered to see a therapist who at a clinic in where she lives. And the defendant is diagnosed with gambling disorder, persistent to fear, and major depressive disorder, recurrent mild with anxious distress mild. her comment about the clinician she's seeing is she says, well, I got to do it, but it's a complete waste of time. She used some more colorful language. She said that person doesn't have a clue what I'm talking about. So, I hear her frustration, and part of what I'm saying to you guys is that the beauty and the power of what you do, this is a little aside, the beauty and power of what you do in educating yourself about gambling addiction in the way that you are. I mean, you may not have the level of expertise that you want or that you will have tomorrow that maybe you don't have today. But in coming into you guys' office, the people are coming into your office can get a sense that you at least have a degree of understanding about what it is that they're talking about. And I can tell you that one of the greatest gifts that we can give to somebody, a lot of the problems that people bring in, we can't fix them. But we can certainly listen and be present and provide them with an opportunity to tell us, to share with us their story, and know that we're listening so that they get a sense that we get it if we listen well enough. So anyway, that's just a brief aside. Now, so that's all the history of this person. It's violent, to say the least, with some extraordinary patterns of abuse and violation that just have become the norm. Here's what she describes about her gambling. From 2011 to early 2018, she primarily played poker, craps, and slots. So she's not strictly an escape, what we call the escape gambler. She is also an action gambler. She reported winnings. She banned herself from the casinos in a certain state in April 2018. Now, clearly the reason somebody's banning themselves, that falls under the criteria, the DSM criteria, made repeated unsuccessful attempts to stop or control one's gambling. So clearly the act of self-exclusion is an attempt to control or cut back or stop one's gambling. So I've got once that allegation is verified, which I have no doubt that it will be, then that clearly meets one of the diagnostic criteria. She gambled daily, spending an unknown amount. And when I talked to her, she said she would leave and go to the casino after work and not come home until she had to go to work the next morning. And I said, well, but you've got an autistic son at the house who has to be taken care of. She said, well, yeah, I would leave him with my current husband, who apparently is a prescription drug abuser, doesn't work, but at least she says she trusts him to take care of her son. So now she's got that mother's guilt of leaving her son in the care of somebody who's not completely reliable. So that's a whole nother piece of this. Gamble daily, spending an unknown amount, and she claimed, quote, it's euphoric, her gambling. I leave there, the casino, and it's the worst feeling on the planet. All right, so what she's telling me now, just in that one sentence, what she's talking about is clearly the dream world of the gambler. She's talking about that fantasy reality polarity that is always at work. The euphoria clearly is that fantasy that I'm going to go in and I'm going to win, and then the reality walking out the door of whatever I won, I gave back. So all of us have been around for even a short period of time, understand the foundational aspect of that fantasy reality polarity. That is always there. Now, here's the other significant piece. She explained that her addiction involves spending all of her winnings, depleting her bank account, and using payday loan advances and borrowing money from friends. She would pay the bare minimum of her bills and gamble the remaining money, including the profits from the money that she stole. She was in a job where she had the ability to move money around. She was in a trusted position, had the ability to move money around, and she had the ability to move money into her own pocket that was supposed to go to other places. Now, here's the rub. When I asked her if she had a plan to put the money back, or how, no, actually what I asked her was, how are you going to solve the problem? How are you going to solve the problem of the money that you stole? What I was hoping to hear, to be honest with you, is her say, well, I was going to put it back with money that I won. I didn't hear that. What I heard her say was, well, I didn't really think about it. I was just going to quit. So that's one of those areas of concern that it's a lot cleaner if somebody tells you, well, I was going to put the money back. What that means is they have a sense that they were just borrowing money and that they were going to put it back when they won. That's cleaner than somebody like this who is taking money. So the open question is that I need to, I'll parse out an answer to, is how she made it okay to take money that didn't belong to her. And it could be that she was simply in a place of, I don't really care. It doesn't matter what happens to me. All I'm focusing is on I need the money. I mean, that may be what it is, but that's something that is an open question. So in 2014, she won $236,000 in one pop. And it wasn't for a bet. It wasn't from a bet. It was in a drawing that took place at the casino. And she told me that was enough money to pay off all of her bills. It was enough money to pay back all the money that she had taken. So I'm listening for that. So maybe there was a sense of putting the money back with that. And she lost that $236,000 within 30 days. She stated that during that instance, she acknowledged that she most likely had the full amount of money she needed to pay back what she had stolen. She stated, my first impulse, if I had the money, would be to head to the casino because that's how I deal with stress. So what she's telling you is that part of the function of her gambling is simply the escape aspect of it. But there's also the reality of the financial problem, so she needs to win money also in order to solve the financial problems. So there you have it. All right, let me pause for a second. I've thrown a lot of information at you. And let me ask you guys if you have any thoughts or reactions to what you've heard so far. Or let me say this, I know you do, but are you willing to share them?
Chris, this is John.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Just there's one aspect I pinged in on there. We hear these trauma stories on a daily basis. There's
Exactly.
One aspect here that's really similar to something I'm dealing with right this very moment with a client.
Okay.
Just around the giving a child up for adoption. This client of mine gave up a child for adoption 39 years ago. It is figured prominently. She's been my client for over 18 months now, and it just kept coming up. She is going through the grief group and working on this, and in the past week has gotten some contact with the family who adopted the child after 39 years. But just seeing the absence of that relationship, and up until this week, the role in grief, and that this was, and she nailed it from the beginning. She said, this is my biggest piece of grief, hands down, compared to everything else. And she's had an incredibly traumatic life, but that loss of that child was just this resonating factor for her throughout her life. And when we had a one-on-one this week, she said, she attributes it to like 33% of her life's problems just dropped away this week. Even though she's had no contact with her son at all, she knows where he is. She's learned some things about him that are troubling, about addiction, etc. But just the fact that there's some contact with the family and willingness was this huge shedding event for her.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful because I mean, you've nailed it. And I think, we talk a lot about the necessity of working at multiple levels. And what I mean by that is while we're addressing, the gambling is an attempted solution, gambling, alcohol, drugs, sexual acting out, overeating, whatever it happens to be, are attempted solutions to a real problem that then become problems themselves that take on a life of their own. So, on the one hand, kind of more at the surface level, we got to work with hopefully interrupting the gambling. And while we're doing that, we're also looking at what's underneath all of that. What is driving this? And man, you're right on with that. And that's where those are the kinds of situations though where the work that we get to do is really gratifying, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, amazing. This is a woman who also has 18 and a half months of sobriety now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
She gambled for 30 something years. She came in here ready to do the work. She's done amazing work. She came in with a lot of at first one of the first things she told me we'd probably been in treatment for about a month. She said, I'm too nice to cry. She didn't want to get into the pain. She didn't want to get into all these things that were underlying the gambling issues. And she's learned to lean into that stuff over the past 18 months.
How were you able to invite her from that kind of starting point to be willing to walk through it?
Trying to do something that I have very poor skills at, and that's being patient.
Yeah, because I'm with you. Because when somebody names that, it's saying, okay, let's take up our pallet and walk right through the middle of it.
Right. And they're not ready to go. She wasn't. It's been a long process. It's been 18 months, and now she's in the grief class now for the second time because the first time she came in and she said, this is the piece of gambling. She wanted to address that exact relationship of the lost child. And she hadn't had contact with him yet. Right. And she realized partway through this was too heavy. And this is something I've done as I go through the grief class. I now recommend that people the first time through the grief class don't address their biggest trauma or grief, that they do a warm-up person first, so to speak. Yeah. So she chose somebody else, and now she came back to do this bigger piece of trauma.
So she named that loss early on, and was there a part of her that wanted a quick, easy fix for it?
Not really. I don't know how to answer that because it was always just, here's this thing hanging out.
Right.
I've tried to reach out, but it's out there with no solution was her thing. It was this huge gaping hole that she could not fill.
Right. And also there's the whole aspect of that is the ambiguity or the not knowing of it all.
Yes.
Whereas obviously again, that's why we want to go back to the nature of a wager, the win-lose, is that we're always with gambling forcing everything to a logical conclusion. It's very clear.
Right.
You either win or lose. And it's also that's one of those very tangible situations whereby years ago, as I began to really listen and hear all of this, is that's where I really began to understand this whole this component of gambling as a morbid grief reaction, is dealing with loss. And then of course then there's the guilt. So then you got the punishment aspect of it, the self-punishment aspect of it also.
And I kind of equate that to when you work with clients around their trauma, you've got that really hard to target piece of trauma called neglect.
Right.
And for every other piece of trauma, there's usually something the clients can at least identify or push back against.
Right.
And with neglect, it's like, I describe it to them, it's like trying to grab fog or grab a cloud or grab water, something, it just slips through their fingers because there's nothing to get back against. And for her, this was very similar because it was just a hole. And only with the thoughts of the thing she had to push back against was, and she worried about, did I make the right choice? Well, she was a young teen at the time, and still having those questions late in life of, even though I was a young teen, did I make the right choice giving this child up for adoption, and those questions and that unresolved information.
Right, and those are questions that sometimes never get answered. But what we do is get to a place of making peace with the unanswerability of those questions. But if you take that case to to the next layer, then I also in my practice, I experience a very similar phenomena with a number of women who have had abortions. Not everybody, but a number of them, and that's a tougher issue. It feels to me like a bit of, at least for me, being being a guy, obviously, I have no idea what that's like to carry a child. I have no idea what it's like to, I've been a part of that and walking through that with some other people to make a decision. And it's also at other layers, it's a politically charged issue. It's a religiously charged issue. So there's all kinds of tough layers. So when I'm working with, and I've got a female client right now who's had several abortions, and she, at least first acknowledgement, kind of the first time through, as she acknowledged that, and I asked her if what if any feelings she had connected to that, and she said, well, the first one I don't, but the second one I do. And we just started talking about that, or touched on that, her last session, and I haven't seen her in a week or two. Those are primary primal losses, and I still contend that placing a bet and winning undoes the problem of loss in metaphor, at least in the short run. It also, if you look at the win-lose and translate that, use different words to deprivation or desolation or emptiness or a hole, and then winning is abundance, which then fills a hole, then I don't think it's taken a very far psychological leap to really understand gambling as a metaphor. And so that's why I'm kind of constant with making sure that we don't get too far removed from the reality of what gambling is, both as a reality and a metaphor. So yeah, that you're absolutely right. Anybody else want to jump into the middle of this one? Brandy, I see you're on board. Hello. Mary Lane down south, you're on. Asuza, you're on. Anybody else? So John, let me go back and ask you, as she grieves, experienced the grief of a primary loss. As she grieves, it's not, that's not one of those things that's one and done, because that's a loss that is always there. Where she's got 18 months absent from her gambling, right?
Yes. Works a very good GA program, is social, has made a lot of changes to her life. Yes.
Okay. And do you have a sense that she making connection between that primary loss and her gambling? And if so, what's her connection with that?
Yes, she's identified a couple of primary losses. Also, there was a whole and very, very troubled upbringing with her mother, and her mother was absent and in a sense abandoned her, and so she's doing a lot of work around that in her own grief work right now. But she definitely draws a direct line between those losses and her gambling and the need to check out and dissociate from them.
Okay, so she gets the part of the gambling, which is kind of anesthesia, or the equivalent of just bellying up to the bar and checking out.
100%, yes.
But certainly part of it is. but that's not all of it. Is because there's a lot of different ways of checking out. In other words, so why is it if she wants to check out? I mean, I'm thinking out loud response. If she wants to check out with gambling, and is she a slots player or a video poker player?
Video poker, yes.
Okay, why wouldn't she just put a video poker game on her iPad and sit at home or go someplace else and play that? No, it's what's the function of money involved?
Oh, I see.
You may not know.
Yeah, well, you're getting into some territory we've kind of worked around. Just because finances are a problem for her, her managing finances is a big deal for her. She's got I've been trying to do some budgeting, and we've done partial budgeting, but it's like we kind of belly up to that a bit, and then she pulls away, and then we belly up to another piece of it, and she pulls away. So there is definitely, I haven't dove in, I think, as far as you're saying to go of what's the meaning of money. I haven't gone that far with her yet. But I think from what you're saying, she has attentional issues and things like that, where she, tolerance for responsibility and just runs away from those problems to some degree.
Okay. So, and the reason I'm saying this is because it's, it's easy to say, well, my gambling is an escape from, I don't have to think about all of this stuff, and all that's absolutely true. But I don't think that's the whole story. There's another function that her gambling served that she may not be aware of that would be important, because gambling involves money. Again, I go back to if it was just an escape, well, that we know that, especially in this day and time, kids do a lot of escape with video games. And maybe they don't cost a dime, or people escape into watching, cruising porn all day in a way that doesn't have to cost any money. So in the midst of this, what we have to do is factor in the equation, wait a second, because she could play a video slot machine on her phone or on her iPad, but she's not doing that. So what is the function that money serves in this? And what I'm also hearing in this case is she's got kind of an approach avoidance from what you're saying to that issue, which is one of those things that cranks up a yellow flag. Because I'm guessing that money is a part of that. The gambling is not just for the function of escape, but it also, in another way, is trying to solve financial problems, and that she wants to win money so that she can deal with some financial problems. That's just a pure guess on my part.
No, it sounds logical.
Go ahead.
No, it sounds logical, and I haven't gotten to that point with her, but I wouldn't be, it was security. She was so she did have another son. She ended up being a single mother for that son for the vast majority of his childhood, and working a variety of jobs. So yes, money was always a concern, both from mismanagement, lack of income, etc. So yes, I can see, the security aspect, and I go there with a couple of other clients. Just money is not money, but money is security, and what's the meaning of money? I just haven't gotten there with her yet, but I could see very much so, as you're saying this, that it could be leading in that direction.
Well, so to that point then, and there's a logic in that, is that and therein may lie the answer that you can lead her to, as part of what she wanted was she was going to win enough money in order to provide for her a sense of security.
Right.
Now, the problem with that is it's not going to happen. I mean, now maybe if she won enough and then walked away and never went back, it could.
Then she wouldn't be an addict.
Well, yeah, exactly. So that's one of the flies in the ointment. The other is that that her sense of security then again, this gets back to this whole victim. And in this case, I'm presenting to you guys, here's somebody who's a victim, clearly,
Yes.
clearly victimized in multiple ways by multiple people repeatedly, simply as a pattern in life, who gets re-victimized, re-traumatized, re-victimized by playing a game where she cannot win, that is rigged for her to lose, over time. And so, again, if we take that characteristic of the nature of a wager where the outcome is outside of our control, then what she would be doing is trying to solve the problem of her need for security. The way that's going to be solved is with something happening that is completely outside of her control, which is the outcome of a wager. So what I'm saying to you is, if she's naming the issue of security, and if that's part of the reason that she gambles, out of the hope that somehow that's going to, and it may be the security is simply being there and not thinking about things. And if that's part of it, then you go to page 10 in the Gamblers Anonymous combo book, where it talks about being at the poker table or the racetrack or the video poker machine. There I felt secure. No great demands were made upon me. So there's those magic words in the Gamblers Anonymous text, which if she's attending GA, you can absolutely pull out that book and use that. There I felt, I think it says, there I felt safe and secure. Why? Because no great demands were made upon me. It's not me doing anything. It's me sitting back and waiting for something to happen. Somebody or something else is making decisions for me. And so what she's doing is her sense of security comes, in a sense, from being in that victim position. So those are themes that I'm hearing that she's presenting to you, that you can then use the Gamblers Anonymous literature, for which she is already familiar with, in order to help her give a name to this next part of her journey. Because I mean, you guys know that our loss in the past is our loss in the past, and we carry that forward with us, but we can't undo that. But when we do our grief work, it's a way of moving through that, so that hopefully we transcend that, so it doesn't own us going forward. But we do all our family of origin work, our historical work, and then we turn around and we run into ourselves. So here's somebody with 18 months, and she may be working a good program, but there's some pieces in this, some critical pieces that are still in front of her to connect with, and that's where you come in. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
Okay. So that's another way of saying, guys, make sure that you're real familiar with the text in the GA combo book, especially with somebody, and I know there's not a lot of GA in Oregon, but people who are involved, you can use that literature and the language in that. And when you do that, you're not going to run into near as much resistance. What you're going to do, you're in a position to help them connect. Because if they're in a GA room, they're reading these words every meeting. And so in one sense, they're already saying yes to it, even though they may not know exactly what they're saying yes to. All right, anybody else? So that's a lot. That's a lot to process, I think. And what I know is that there's aspects of this story that are relevant and are variations on a theme to that which all of you are working with. One of the things that I said this earlier that I really like about doing the forensic work is that it, I believe, in a very tangible way, it gives me an opportunity to make a difference in a number of different ways. One is that it gives me the opportunity to help an individual, because there's people that I've worked with that just in the process of doing this evaluation, it's kind of the equivalent of you know, what we did with when I was out there and I interviewed the gambler. Some of you were there, and they get to make connections for themselves. So in this process of interviewing this woman, what I know is there's some things that she will learn about herself that will serve her well going forward. It also is an opportunity to educate people in the criminal justice system, which my hope and my belief is that then makes a difference. Again, you know, I think most every state has programs in place to connect substance abuse and illegal activity and deferral programs. We're still not there yet with gambling, except in a couple of areas. It also is the opportunity to educate attorneys about the nature of the problem. And so I'm always grateful for a legal case that comes in, which gives me the opportunity to leverage what I know into a broader community, which I hope in some way makes a difference. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to visit with you guys, because I think it does the same thing. And you know, also kind of another affirmation from you, for you guys, is it's always humbling to think about what we get to do with our life. That's also difficult, and certainly for me, there's days where I don't want to take a phone call, you know, or I'd rather be out doing nothing. But if you really kind of pause and reflect, and give thanks that we get to do what we get to do, and that we get to be in a position to make a difference in others' lives, and that starts with us paying attention to ourselves and the people around us, and making a difference in our own life. I think we live in a world that appears to be increasingly polarized, and where there's a lot of discord and disunity, whether it's in an individual life or whether it's collectively. And so I think any opportunity that we have to be an agent of healing, indeed, is a gift and a blessing. So with that, I don't, other than rambling on and on, I don't have anything else for you guys today, unless somebody else wants to jump in. So I'll pause for a second. Brandy, you got anything?
Just taking it all in, and I really appreciate what you said about kind of reflecting on our privilege as counselors, that we get to work with gambling in this way, and also working with our own selves in a very existential way.
Yeah. I think it's important that we acknowledge that, you know, every now and then, to ourselves and to each other. It's rather humbling and frightening, because I got to tell you, I don't know about you guys, but the gamblers that I see, I don't see high bottom gamblers, and I'm not sure that you guys do either. I think for the most part, gamblers come in pretty well beat up, and people who are pretty desperate. And so we get to go to some tough places with them. And you know, you've heard me say it, if we're not dealing with and acknowledging our own pain and walking through that, we can't be present to others in the midst of theirs. So, all right, anything else before we sign off? Also, one pragmatic, and I sent a clarification to Greta. I noticed she said that the next month is December the 6th or something like that, and I pointed out that that's not the second Thursday of the month, even though I'm okay with that if that's what everybody wants. But anyway, you may get a clarification on next month's date, and then after next month, that's the end of the line for this process. And I think she's got something else in mind from the state to do going forward. I'm not sure what that is, but anyway, as always, I'm available to you guys in between. And have a great Thanksgiving, and I look forward to catching up with you next month. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
And
you, Chris.
that is correct. It will be on the 6th next month. There's something, I don't
Okay.
remember what it is, but there's something internal in the state here, not necessarily here in OHA, but I think something also with the system, I don't remember what it was, where we had to move the date to the 1st instead of the 2nd Thursday.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying that. That works
Yeah.
fine. For me.
Okay,
Well,
good.
Thank you,
Good.
Bye,
Chris.
guys. Take care. All right.
Thank
Hope
you
you
so
feel
much.
better.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I think I got everybody on this, but I want to make sure that we get your CEUs. So we have Nathan, John, Jean, Mary Lane, Azusa, and Brandy. Did I miss anybody?
I think that was it.
Nope, you got us.
Okay. All right, everyone. Have a great day. And thank you very much, Chris.
Okay. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.